So, this is a Deltarune theory/analysis concerning Friend, an enigmatic entity that has personally sent me down a rabbit hole from which there is no escape. In the wake of the new chapters, there's been so much to think about and go over, and I don't normally make theories or analyses, especially in video format. But among all the things that I find myself fascinated by, Friend is definitely one of them, and I haven't really seen any video specifically dedicated to them yet since the release of chapters 3 and 4. So in this video, I will be going over everything about Friend, from what we know to be true, to the connections we can make to them, who and what they could be, and what they could contribute to the game's overall narrative and themes. But before we start, there are some forewarnings I should give. This video will contain major spoilers for Deltarune chapters 3 and 4, if that wasn't obvious already. If you haven't played or seen a playthrough of the new chapters, I would highly recommend doing so before watching this video. Second, as I said, I am not very experienced with making theories, so please don't take what I say as gospel. The truth of the matter is that we just don't really know a lot about Friend, and all that we can do is recognize patterns that we can then potentially connect to them. So please understand that this theory/analysis might have holes or tenuous connections in it. If there's anything I've missed, overlooked, or gotten wrong, I'll address them in the pinned comment. Constructive criticism is also welcome, just please be kind. Next, this analysis is also made with Death being the Roaring Knight in mind. There's a lot of evidence to support Death being the Knight, but this is not the video for that. I would discourage those who feel differently about the Knight's identity from debating it in the comments here, but if you believe the Knight to be Carol, Rudy, or Papyrus, that's fine, I can't stop you. I'd just rather not argue. If you are curious to learn more about Death being the Knight, I'd recommend Mr. Brick & Co.'s video on it, which you can find a link for in the description. Finally, all the sources for the information provided in this video will be credited in the description. A large portion of these connections are not ones I personally made on my own, and so for those going into this video already interested in Friend, I'll be touching on things you've more than likely already heard before. Additionally, after finishing writing this, I was made aware that there exists a Friend master doc created by WandyDoodles on Twitter, so going through it, I made a few changes to this presentation to include some of the things I'd missed. I will also be quoting some things from the doc at certain points, as it words things in a way I find helpful. WandyDoodles is a big source for a lot of these Friend connections and findings in general. Again, credit where credit is due. I just need to make a disclaimer that my intention is to simply make these ideas more accessible through a video format, not to claim any of these connections or ideas as completely original or my own. Now, with all that out of the way, let's start with the basics. Friend is known as image_friend for their sprite and device_friend for their object in the files. If you aren't sure what an object is in GameMaker terms, it's essentially a blueprint that defines how a particular element in a game should behave. An object contains a set of instructions, like events or actions, that dictate what happens under specific circumstances. So, when you assign a sprite to an object and then put it in a room, it's kind of like using a recipe to prepare a meal. The object is the recipe, being what makes a particular element interactable. I hope that makes sense. If I got anything wrong, feel free to correct me because I'm not familiar with programming games. Second, Friend appears at least once in each chapter, excluding chapter 1, particularly in out-of-bounds areas. They are also consistently depicted as a pair of heterochromatic eyes, one yellow and one pink, with a wide Cheshire grin. The Cheshire Cat is also known for fading into the darkness, leaving only his wide grin behind. This is something Friend does as well, as we will soon get to. Friend is also the only entity so far to appear in-game while following the same naming convention as assets and files associated with the depths, such as the Garnermaker sequence. So what I mean by this is that in Deltarune's code, there's a very clear distinction made for assets and files that are used in the Garnermaker sequence, or the Vessel Creation sequence, or the depths, however you want to call it, compared to the assets and files used in the Light and Dark worlds. In the Light and Dark worlds, files and assets follow the typical naming convention you see in RPGs made using GameMaker. Depending on the asset type, whether it's a sprite, object, room, or sound, the asset's file name will be in all lowercase and begin with an abbreviation specifying what the asset type is. So, SPR is sprite, OBJ is object, room or RM is room, and SND is sound. However, Deltarune has assets found in the Garnermaker sequence or the depths follow a noticeably different naming convention. They are in all uppercase and not abbreviated and use much more specific or verbose wording. So, sprite becomes image, object becomes device or process, room becomes place, and sound becomes audio. The fact that Friend is the only entity who appears outside of the Garnermaker sequence or the depths, albeit still largely in out-of-bounds areas, while still generally following this naming convention as said assets, is very intriguing. Next, let's talk about all of Friend's in-game appearances so far, chapter by chapter. Their first appearance is in Chapter 2, where they can be seen briefly if you walk back to the far side of the far left room in the basement of Queen's Mansion after you trigger the door to close. They're visible for a split second before fading into the darkness. They also originally had a very low 0.5% chance of appearing on a now unused barricade attack in the roller coaster fight with Birdly. In Chapter 3, Friend makes multiple appearances, the first being when they appear in the cutscene where Ralsei explains Dark Worlds to Susie, as a cat resembling the Androgyny amalgamate from Undertale. The next, although this isn't a direct appearance and is more so a nod to their presence, is in the S-Rank Room's vending machine that lets you buy a free product called Smile worth 1 point. Description reads, "Always at your humble service," and buying the item prompts the vending machine flavor text to read, "It smiled." They also appear twice on the sword route, the first time in the first Mantle game if you cut down the trees to both the left and right of the pyramid entrance, one room briefly showing Friend's eyes and the other showing their grin. It's worth noting that in either room here, Friend's brief appearance can be triggered by stepping on a certain tile. There will also be a garbled laugh sound followed by Friend's eyes or grin fading quickly. The second time is during the battle with Eram. They summon many friends from the second phase onwards. These friends appear as cat heads and leave behind a laughing grin when defeated, as well as having a chance of dropping a healing candy. In Chapter 4, Friend appears in the third sanctuary in the dark room containing a wafer guard, hidden behind a wall and disappearing after being seen. They also have a chance of appearing in the Batat minigame in the mic room, their normally pink eye now colored magenta. Alright, this is where we'll begin by talking about the possible connections that can be made to Friend. Again, keep in mind that because these will largely just be connections, it's not 100% definitive, but I still feel it's worth going over. So to begin, let's talk about Friend's connections to RNG. First, the connections that can be made in-game. In Chapter 3's Sword Route, the Friend's drop rate of healing candy changes depending on how many times Chris has died to Eram. 0 deaths equals 0 healing candy. If a candy has already been dropped in Phase 2, however, there will be no more healing candy, unless Chris has died at least 7 times to Eram. Past at least 7 deaths, the chance for a healing candy to drop is 50% if Chris has less than 1/4 their HP, 30% if less than 2/3 their HP, and 5% otherwise. Chris's HP is checked each time a friend dies. An additional 2% chance is added each time Chris dies to Eram, capping at 80% chance. As you can see, here's the drop rate mechanic for the friend's healing candy I found in the code. Next, in the Batat minigame, Friend has a chance of appearing if your Gold Cat's level is 40 or higher and they collide with a meteor. The chance increases the higher your Gold Cat's level is, and touching Friend gives you a random number of points, which ranges from between minus 50,000 and 300,000 points. This means that Friend can take away a maximum of 50,000 points, or give you a maximum of 300,000 points. Now, let's go over the connections Friend has to RNG through the Spamton Sweepstakes. On the Sweepstakes main page, there's a 50% chance of getting a 1000 lucky banner, suggesting you can win a random prize if you're lucky. Clicking on it takes you to Secret, a page with 16 wardrobes, and the tab title is, "What's Behind Door Number 1?" Each wardrobe has a different prize. This means there's a 6.25% chance of getting the first prize if you don't know what's behind them. This prize is Chair, another webpage with a sprite of a chair. The tab title is But What If It Could, and clicking on the chair makes it become more pixelated with the sound of water, and the tab title is changed to Get Darker Than Dark. Every time you click on the chair, there's a 5% chance that Friend's eyes will appear with a laugh sound. It brings you back to the main page, but now the last wardrobe on Secret is stuck open, and nothing can be interacted with. The tab title is You Won? It's clear now, in hindsight, that the chair webpage was foreshadowing Ralsei's explanation of Dark Worlds in Chapter 3. However, I still think it was good to go over this due to its RNG mechanic and references to luck. Lastly, on rare cats accessed via Noelle's Rain Post, Friend has a 0.1% chance of appearing and resetting your score to 0. Alternatively, they will appear once 100 cats have been clicked. This last one was added when the Sweepstakes was updated less than a month before the release of Chapters 3 and 4. Continuing on with the Sweepstakes, we now move to Noelle's blog post. Just as a quick disclaimer, Toby himself has stated he doesn't consider anything outside of what happens in the game itself to be canon. I respect that, and at the same time, seeing as how Chair was directly foreshadowing Friend's first appearance in Chapter 3, I don't think it's a bad idea to look to outside information made by Toby for references or hints. Even if these instances Noelle describes didn't literally happen in the same canon the game itself takes place in, we can still use them to piece together potential clues for the future. Besides, Noelle herself has a knack for breaking games, and her Girl Next Door theme literally has Gaster's theme in it, so is it really that impossible for her to have some connection to Friend? Now, according to Noelle in Blue Circle, Cat Petters has a unique animation style. All the pets are made of circles. For example, one circle is the head, another is the eyes, another is the body, etc. The "until next time" highlighted in blue here is a link that takes you back to Noelle's main blog post, Code, and on Code the word clues is highlighted as well and takes you to egg. However, before that, there's cat petters. In cat petters, Noelle warns about incompatible pets being bred as a result of the pets being made from separate mods. On this post, "until one day" is highlighted, which takes you to egg as well. Now, in egg, she talks about the time she got a white egg with the message "special." It never hatched or did anything besides make a weird sound, and she couldn't get rid of it even if she uninstalled and reinstalled the game. At the time, she thought her computer was haunted, but now she thinks that it was because she had so many mods installed that the egg just didn't know what to hatch into. Keep this specific phrasing in mind. So, she took care of the egg, but the next day, the egg was gone, with a message saying it left home due to happiness. Lastly, in Rain, Noelle talks about the cat petters minigames and how she feels that there must have been more rare cats, as she remembers getting a cat that actually lowered how many points she had. She also says how there exists a Cat Petters the RPG, which she feels is a ripoff of Dragon Blazers. Again, this was added to the sweepstakes just less than a month before chapters 3 and 4 dropped. What fascinates me about these posts in particular is how it consistently involves cat petters. For those who don't know, Cat Petters is a multimedia franchise in Deltarune's universe, having both an RPG and a movie series, but originated as a PC game where you could hatch cats via an RNG system and take care of them. This is a clear homage to the 90s PC game Cats by PF Magic, where it's basically the same premise but without an RNG system. Notably, in Cat Petters, the cats players hatch via RNG can have different rarities, so the game incentivizes farming eggs and getting rid of more common rarity ones to get the highest rarity. At first glance, these posts about cat petters don't seem like they have anything to do with Friend explicitly. Sure, the Rare Cats page from Rain has a 0.1% chance of Friend appearing, but what more to it is there? Well, for now, let's keep this in the back of our minds. Moving on, Friend has many connections to Chapter 3's Sword Route. First, the controller used to play Mantle is a key item called Odd Controller, with ugly pink and yellow buttons. Next, when getting the shelter key at the end of the second Mantle game, it says, "You got the shelter key" in pink text, but in the third and final Mantle game when the shelter key is used, it says, "Use the shelter key" in yellow text. Chris attempts to move hero_sword away from the shelter. Friend's cat head, disembodied eyes, and disembodied mouth sprites in the files are called SPR_, SPR_eyes, and SPR_laugh, as opposed to image_friend. This is possibly because they are not exactly out of bounds, as the Friend sprite in Ralsei's Dark with explanation cutscene is also named SPR_nondescript_room_ in the files. However, it's also possible that Friend sprites here feature several underscores to reference Noelle's egg blog post, where she specifically concludes with how she forgot the name she gave the special egg, meaning that Friend isn't their true name, it's just been forgotten. But I digress. Another post from Noelle, IcePalace_Glacier, can be accessed via Damn You Tenna after clicking on the TV, then the top static box at the bottom of the page, then by scrolling up to the top of the blue screen and clicking on the black door. This was obvious foreshadowing of the Sword Route, but Noelle says in the post that it was a part of Dragon Blazers, which is based on Lord of the Hammer, which was based on the prophecy. Remember how I said Noelle felt in her Rain post that Cat Petters the RPG was just a ripoff of Dragon Blazers? Interesting. I'm sure that means nothing. Sarcasm, sarcasm. Additionally, I'm not sure what to make of this, but when the soul is outside of Chris's body in the holiday house in Chapter 4, there's submissible dialogue between Noelle and Susie in the basement when they go to fix the breaker that can be seen if the soul stays still long enough. Noelle talks about how her fears of basements stem from the underground levels of Dragon Blazers, where the music just repeats over and over. Then she says how the second Dragon Blazers game had an evil route that she played in secret. Considering that Mantle is likely based off of Dragon Blazers in-universe, it makes me wonder if Mantle is a rendition of either the first Dragon Blazers underground levels or Dragon Blazers 2's evil route. Or are the underground levels just a part of the evil route, considering Susie agrees with Noelle that they were weird despite her only ever playing the second game, specifically the evil route. Is Mantle just a rendition of the evil route? I don't know. This isn't really that important, but I just find this odd. Let me know what you make of it. In any case, next we can talk about Friend and the secret bosses. This is where things get a little murky. Friend may be the one behind the secret bosses, particularly Jevil and Spampton going insane. In Chapter 1, Sham distinguishes between a strange knight who visited recently and a strange someone Jevil met. This implies that the one who spoke to Jevil is separate from the knight. After all, if it were the same person, why would Sham say that the knight appeared only recently, but then speak of the incident surrounding Jevil like it happened long ago? Maybe it's just for mystery's sake, but it'd still be an odd choice to me. It isn't the only possible Friend-secret boss connection, though. Spampton has many connections to Friend. Friend's first in-game appearance is in the Mansion of Queen's basement, a place you go specifically for Spampton. Spamton's glasses are also yellow and pink, and as a deal maker, it seems to function like a good luck charm, with a 30% money increase, but also plus 5 defense, plus 5 magic, and 40% damage reduction for cat puppet attacks. Interestingly, when Noelle is modded into your party after you've obtained the deal maker, equipping it on her prompts dialogue where she says it seems familiar. This could just be due to the fact Noelle has connections to Spamton as well, but like I said earlier, keep this in mind. Some Spamton Neo's bullets are also of the cat puppet element, like Task Manager, Task, and Shadow Guys. One of Spamton's attacks is like the Friends summoned by Eram. And Friend could be a reference to the Maneki Neko. Yellow lucky cats symbolize money, and pink lucky cats symbolize love. For those unaware, the Maneki Neko, which literally means beckoning cat in Japanese, is a figurine often considered a good luck charm. Also called lucky cats, they are often displayed generally near the entrance of shops, restaurants, dry cleaners, laundromats, and a myriad of other businesses, equipped with a mechanical paw that slowly moves back and forth. They are thought to bring success to small business owners with how their mechanical paw beckons customers. There are a lot of folktales surrounding the good luck of cats, one of which I'll read here. According to a folktale, the operator of an impoverished shop or inn, tavern, temple, etc. took in a starving stray cat despite barely having enough to feed himself. In gratitude, the cat sat in front of the store beckoning customers, thus bringing prosperity as a reward to the charitable proprietor. Ever after, the beckoning cat has been a symbol of good luck for small business owners. As you can see, this is very similar to Spamton, as he was initially very unlucky before getting into contact with a strange someone, from which he would then suddenly become very lucky and successful. Additionally, Maneki Nekos come in different colors, and each color has its own meaning. Yellow symbolizes money, and pink symbolizes love. It's no coincidence then that in the RTVS segment of the Spamton Sweepstakes, there was the Spamton Value Network and the Spamton Love Network, along with the pink-yellow color combo all over. So, it's possible that Friend was the one who spoke to Jevil initially, and it's very likely that they were also the one who brought Spamton his good luck and success. But if this was the case, what about it made Jevil go insane, and why did Friend cut off contact with Spamton? And what about the Knight and the Shadow Crystals? How does that factor into all this? Are Friend and the Knight colluding in some way? This also doesn't fully explain the fact that Spamton's communication with his mysterious source of good luck was primarily over the phone. We know that through Krisha's phone in the Dark World and by both the flavor text from it in Chapter 2 onwards and what one of the Addisons says after defeating Spamton Neo, that the garbage noise is in all likelihood muse_smile.ogg. This audio is thought to connect to Gaster, as it originally plays in entry number 17. But is it really Gaster? Consider how in entry number 17, over the muse_smile.ogg audio, his own sound font plays. This suggests that muse_smile.ogg comes from somewhere, something, or someone else. Furthermore, while we can speculate Gaster's connection to the shelter, it's not the only place where muse_smile.ogg, slowed down by 666%, plays. It also plays in Noelle's basement. And maybe it's just me, but the fact that both Jevil and Spamton Neo, the latter being at least in the normal route, are found in basements as well, seems to suggest that places below having either a creepy noise or secret bosses residing in them isn't just a coincidence. So I think muse_smile.ogg is perhaps the sound of the depths. That doesn't really explain why it's called Smile. I'll get to that later. Okay, now let's talk about Friend's connections to Mike. Friend is referenced several times in the Mike room. Many of the attacks, mechanics, room objects, etc. in the Mike fight reference a cat with pink and yellow eyes, and Cat Mike's eyes are pink and yellow. Small Mike's dialogue of Cat Mike is the Mike with the highest score alludes to Friend. They say, "I swear, you people see pink and yellow and think, oh, a friend. Being a friend doesn't make them yours. Those teeth, they bite." The Mike minigames are based off of the Cat Pedders minigames, and one of them, Batat, even features Friend. Remember Noelle's blog post I talked about? Yeah. All of them were in reference to Cat Pedders, with Rain, the most recent one, being a direct foreshadowing of the minigames in Chapter 4's Mike Room. Therefore, the fact that Friend appears in Batat means that Noelle was clearly talking about encountering Friend in that endless cave minigame she played, which was also Batat. She even mentions Jongler by name, and although more subtle, Pluie is hinted at throughout the post as well, as his name is a misspelling of the French word pluie, which means rain. Considering these minigames all originate from Cat Pedders, a game in which Noelle encountered Friend, this connects Friend even more strongly to Cat Pedders and by extension, cats. This makes their Maneki Neko connections and cat-like appearances all make more sense. However, it's unclear as to whether this means Friend's true name is Mike or not. One thing that may suggest it is, though, is that the Maneki Neko usually depicts a calico Japanese bobtail cat. In general, Japanese bobtails are considered a lucky breed, but the calico variation, called Mike Neko, literally translates to tricolored cat and is considered the luckiest. Interestingly, in Romaji, it's written as Mike but pronounced Mike. So if the Friend and Maneki Neko connections hold up at all, it's possible Mike is their true name, but it's just not clear yet. Next, one interesting thing is because Mike's name is a pun on the word mic, short for microphone, the optional mic fight on PC, PlayStation, and Switch versions involve using your own mic and voice. However, this could be a reference to the two prophecies. They'll hear the Ring of Heaven's call and they'll see the tail of Hell-Tick crawl, with the Ring of Heaven's call being the player angel, if that theory is correct, and the tail of Hell being Friend. This would suggest that Friend is especially drawn to you, the player, but it's not so clear that this is the case. As a side note, I am aware of the number of hints that suggest the player is the angel, but the microom connection to the prophecy is probably not what was intended, so it's unclear in that regard. Next, Friend could very well have connection to the eggs, as well as the Forgotten Man. Remember Noelle's egg post? Well, interestingly, that post can be accessed not only via cat petters, but also by the web pages Man and the Poor Children, connecting the egg Noelle found, which is an allusion to Friend, to the Forgotten Man. The Forgotten Man likely isn't Gaster as in the voice, given the Japanese localization. In Japanese, Gaster speaks in a mix of kanji and katakana, while the Forgotten Man and the Seven Flying Aces speaks more like a Lightner, and Lightworld characters' dialogues are very hiragana heavy. The sender of the secret 2024 Valentine's Day letter speaks same as the Forgotten Man in Japanese as well. I've seen a lot of people say that the Forgotten Man could be Deltarune's Gaster before Undertale's Gaster shattered across time and space, with the implication being that Gaster, as in the voice, is Undertale's Gaster and that Deltarune's Gaster was Chris's therapist, but I just don't agree with that personally. While certainly still ambiguous, it's possible that Another Hymn, the song that plays in the Garnermaker sequence, is named that because the Gaster/voice you were in contact with isn't Undertale's Gaster. Of course, it could just be referencing the fact that Gaster is shattered and this is one of his fragmented parts, as we see the second Gaster follower holding a piece of him back in Undertale, but there's enough ambiguity to leave it uncertain on both fronts. Another issue I take with the idea that it's Deltarune's Gaster is that Chris very clearly saw something or someone behind the tree, so why would their therapist appear in place of that in these egg rooms? Sure, it could be because he helped Chris repress those memories, but then what's the point of finding the eggs and remembering him if he's purposely helping Chris repress them further? Not to mention, the idea that there is just more than one Gaster in this game feels contrived to me. So no, I don't think the Forgotten Man is Gaster in any form. I will get to that and who I think it is though, so stick with me. The eggs could also be a reference to the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. The TLDR is, until directly observed, the egg is in two opposite states at the same time. And the Forgotten Man and Friend are both heavily associated with opposite extremes. The Forgotten Man's dialogue is full of opposites, while Friend is consistently connected to RNG. If you aren't aware of the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, it's essentially a thought experiment that Erwin Schrödinger developed to illustrate what he saw as problems, or a paradox rather, with the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. The Copenhagen interpretation basically asserts that everything in quantum mechanics is indeterministic, meaning that it is all up to chance and nothing on the quantum level is causative. Everything a particle does is purely random. So to criticize this, the thought experiment states that if the Copenhagen interpretation is true, then a hypothetical cat in a closed box can be considered to be simultaneously alive and dead as a result of its fate being linked to a random subatomic event that may or may not occur until directly observed. Viewed in this way, it becomes a paradox, posing the question of when exactly quantum superposition, that is, the idea that until particles are observed by us, they are in all possible states they could be in, ends and reality resolves into one possibility or the other. When connecting this back to Deltarune's eggs, the eggs are described as not too important and not too unimportant, and when you attempt to toss the egg in the light world, the flavor text reads, "What egg?" This demonstrates how it's in a superposition similar to the Schrodinger's cat. The egg is both important and unimportant until you check it. When you check it or observe it, it goes into the unimportant state. Considering how Sans and Undertale was associated with quantum mechanics jokes and science jokes in general, it's not too outside the realm of possibility to think that the eggs could also be a reference. Lastly, the egg rooms are tied to RNG, out of bounds, and in-between areas as well. In Chapter 1 and 2, there's a 2% chance of being entered. In Chapter 3, the egg room is very out of bounds, and in Chapter 4, it is found by walking between the second Sanctuary Moss room and the Secret Room 8 times. Wait, what? Oh, that's right, the Secret Room. And with that, let's move to discussing Friend's connections to the prophecy. The Secret Room in Chapter 4's Second Sanctuary, accessed by walking under the window in the moss room with an egg shape at the top, has several interesting things. First, a peculiar book that, when read, reads, "And so wept the fallen star, making rivers with its tears. Then, slowly, from the bitter water, something grew. It looked like glass." This is where the bit with the shadow crystals gets confusing. Like I speculated earlier, Friend could be the one who drove Javelin's Smampton insane, but whether that's an incident separate from the shadow crystals or not is unclear. From this text, however, it seems a lot like the shadow crystals originate from the Knight. After all, the Knight's attacks are of the dark star element, and some bullets resemble stars, and considering it's very possible that the Knight is Death, she was a musical prodigy, which could give the fallen star a double meaning. The Knight is also seen either crying or drooling when we first meet them. In the files, it only calls this droop, but I lean more into the Knight crying here. Either way, there's even more ambiguity regarding the shadow crystals, so I'll come back to that later. Next, a prophecy image with a house between two trees and the text, Roots. One thing about the Roots prophecy image I feel is worth noting. I found through the Friend Master Doc that the prophecy image for Roots that has a house in between two trees looks very similar to the adoption center from Cats. Interestingly, the word Roots is found in Digital Roots, the song that plays in the Mansion of Queen's basement in Chapter 2, as well as Bit Roots, the song that plays in the third and final Mantle game before reaching max level. Whether this image is meant to represent Friend's roots through an intentional resemblance to the Cat's adoption center is unclear, as it could very well still be too vague to tell. And an NPC that says, "I heard something in between. It was mixed up." And then their next sentence is scrambled, but when unscrambled it reads, "Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail." And then they conclude with, "The poor children." Remember how the ERAM fight takes place in the shelter where Friend appears? The shelter itself is where the forest would grow. Interesting. Next, in the third Sanctuary's Princess Ribbon puzzle room, there are two prophecies. The first is an image of a ring with angel wings and text that reads, "They'll hear the ring of heaven's call." The second is an image of a tail made up of 11 circles and text that reads, "They'll see the tail of hell take crawl." Following that, there is an unused rendition of the second one's image where it's instead 11 circles with a pointed tip at the end. Organic also has two interesting battle dialogues, the tail, T-A-I-L, which must not be followed, and the tail, T-A-L-E, which must be followed. So all of these things can likely connect back to Friend. In that case, this suggests Friend's presence is in the prophecy. But if that's the case, then we have to ask, who wrote DELTARUNE, the prophecy? From both Ralsei in Chapter 1 and a piece of the prophecy itself in Chapter 4, the prophecy is said to have originally been whispered among shadows. This suggests that the prophecy originated from the Dark Worlds or the Depths. In Chapter 1, Ralsei says the prophecy was foretold by time and space. In Chapter 4, Caddy says the same. The first instance of time and space being used is in the second Gaster Followers dialogue, where they say he was shattered across time and space. In the opening song at church in Chapter 4, one of the lyrics is, "Of the shadows cutting deep and the heroes that save us." In entry number 17, one of Gaster's lines is, "The shadows cutting deeper." In the prophecy, the description for the first hero is the only one to be punctuated by an exclamation point, signifying fondness or excitement for the first hero in particular. If we assume that the discarded vessel was originally meant to be the first hero instead of Chris, considering it is Yor and Gaster's creation, it would make sense for the prophecy to express a distinct fondness for it. Via the Wayback Machine, an archived version of Deltarune's website from 2015 has only a very low contrast image with text and wingdings that reads, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting." And in 2016 to 2017, the text was changed to, "Three heroes appeared to banish the angels' heaven," which directly paraphrases Ralsei's summary. So not only is there a paraphrasing of Ralsei's summary of the prophecy, but before that there was a direct quote from entry number 17. Various instances, especially surrounding saber bosses, also reference phrases like "darker yet darker." As we all know, "dark, darker yet darker" originates from entry number 17 as well. Sham references it after you beat Jevil and return to talk to them, when they say, "Since that time, the strange words he said have stuck inside my cotton, and my view of this world has become darker yet darker." And Queen does too in Chapter 2's Weird Route when she says, "Wake? No, she's already awakened too much. Let her close her eyes and sleep away into a darker, darker dream." Iram also possibly alludes to it before their fight when they say, "Oh, don't make that sour face. I can see in the dark, you know. The question is, can you?" And arguably, Gerson does as well in Chapter 4 when he says, "I just think those words shine a bit too bright. A path so blue it's all you can see. So I say, why don't we go between the lines? It's darker there." And in Chapter 4, during the Hammer of Justice secret boss fight, Gerson says, "The story, it became so grand, so overwhelming. Some say it swallowed up the author himself." This could very well reference the first Gaster Followers dialogue where they say that one day he fell into his creation and... With all these things in mind, it's very likely that Gaster created the prophecy, But hold on, we're assuming Friend is also a part of the prophecy. Not only that, but it's very likely that they're connected to Gaster in some way. So if Gaster wrote the prophecy, then where did Friend come from? Did Gaster create Friend? Well, like I said earlier, Friend is the only entity so far to appear in-game while following the same naming convention as assets and files associated with the depths. Friend is also heavily associated with RNG, and the fun events in Undertale are also reliant on chance. Friend is also connected to the Shelter, as seen in the Mantle game, and the Shelter is known for playing muse_smile.ogg slowed down by 666%, the same sound that plays in entry number 17, among other places. In entry number 17, Gaster asks, "What do you two think?" at the end. While still unclear who the two are, one could be Friend. And in the Chapter 3 Dark World explanation cutscene, Friend takes on a form resembling the Endogeny Amalgamate from Undertale, suggesting that perhaps Gaster created them as he, like Undertale Alphys, was a scientist. But, okay, if not Gaster, then who or where else? Noel's special egg that left home due to happiness could be Friend's roots, but this implies the Forgotten Man created them, leaving the question of who the Forgotten Man is. And Friend could have simply created themselves, as their connections to the depths, from where darkness likely originates, suggests they were created from darkness. But Friend is also associated with an object, the chair in what appears to be Susie's room, suggesting that they are a darkener like any else. Or maybe no one created Friend, and Friend is instead a tangible representation of something more thematic. The fact of the matter is that we just don't know who or what created Friend. Sure, they have connections to Gaster, but if Gaster created them alongside the prophecy, why would he paint one of his own creations as a seemingly malicious force? I say seemingly because, to be fair, this is a Toby Fox game, so the boundaries between good and evil become quite thin. Not to mention, hell is likely just a way of referring to the depths. But if Friend is also the one who drove Spamton and Jevil insane, then it's clear they can't be fully trusted. So if they were created by Gaster, then what happened? Gaster clearly shows some level of fondness for the vessel, a creation he had a hand in, so why not Friend? Is it possible that something went wrong? Again, we just don't know. And I personally don't think Friend literally originated from Noel's special egg, because to me, Noel's blog posts are more or less just bits of foreshadowing and references to what we'll see in the future, as opposed to literal canon events that took place prior to the start of the game. The reason they connect back to Noelle is because of her knack for breaking games, deaths, and her weird connections to Gaster. And yes, I know she is shown in canon to love cat petters, but remember that Toby said he doesn't consider anything outside of the game itself to be legitimately canon. This is why I think speculating on Friend's literal origins is more or less pointless right now. We could go on all day about this and we still wouldn't really get anywhere. That's not to say speculating isn't fun. It is. This entire video is speculation after all. If I had to absolutely say what I personally think Friend's origins are, it'd be something more thematic. Because, at the end of the day, Deltarune is not just a game where events unfold chronologically. It's a story with themes and an overarching message. What I'm intending to get at here is how Friend could fit into those themes and the story's message. So, again, we don't know. There's clear connections Friend has to Gaster, but to suggest he created them can potentially complicate things further and only open more questions. I've gone over them already, but there's one I've intentionally left out, one that supports my personal stance that Gaster isn't the Forgotten Man. Because if Gaster created Friend, then why does Gaster see the eggs as an issue? Okay, so what you're seeing here is the trophies you can obtain on the PlayStation version of Deltarune. These are the trophies you can earn when you complete each chapter, and as you can see, the trophy requirement for all of them is to complete without issue. There's no further elaboration. However, as players have found out, these trophies are only obtainable if you haven't collected an egg in the trophy's corresponding chapter. What's even weirder is that, originally, there was going to be narration from Gaster at the end of Chapter 4 saying that the halfway mark has been attained with some issues, if you only collected some eggs rather than all of them so far. But this was cut out. The reason I consider this a problem with the idea Gaster created Friend is because, as I've gone over, Friend has clear connections to the eggs and, by extension, the Forgotten Man. So this begs the question, whether he created Friend or not, why does Gaster see the eggs as an issue? And why hasn't he done anything about it? What does he even mean by issue anyway? Well, maybe we can gain better insight into this by switching gears a little. Let's talk about the Forgotten Man. Who exactly is he? The Forgotten Man is often referred to as just simply a or the man, and with he/him pronouns, but as of Chapter 3 has been referred to as the Forgotten Man. He hides behind a tree from the Scarlet Forest in a hidden room once per chapter, and he is responsible for giving Chris an egg once per chapter. He appears to be both aware of Deltarune the Prophecy and Deltarune the Executable/game, or just a prophecy with inconsistent spelling. He speaks in a confusing, whimsical manner of speech, and in the Japanese localization, speaks in the light world style with hiragana-heavy dialogue, and addresses the listener with a warm parental tone, like they are a child. He is also heavily associated with Friend, Chris, Noelle, and possibly Des. Next, let's go over the basics of the egg rooms. The egg rooms are typically hidden in between other rooms or otherwise out of bounds, and in Chapter 1 and 2 require RNG, and in Chapters 3 and 4 require active searching to access them. Chris is the only one who can access these rooms, even if other characters are in the party. And in every egg room, the song or its variations of Man.ogg plays. Man.ogg is originally from a list of fan songs Toby made for the game Yumen Nikki in 2012, initially called Waltz of Sakam Masada. The 8-bit version is also reused in Chapter 3's egg room, completely unchanged. The Forgotten Man gives Chris the egg, a key item which, when used, provides no effect except a weird sound, and does not remove it from the inventory. It does not change forms between the light and dark worlds either, and it can be dropped in the light world with the flavor text, "What egg?" but always reappears in the inventory when in the dark worlds. The item description for the egg is not too important, not too unimportant, and having an egg obtained will prompt narration describing Chris seeing a man in the light world, in Chapter 2 when looking through a car window, and in Chapter 4 when looking through the door to QC's diner while it rains. Now we can explore the egg rooms in each chapter, one by one. Starting with Chapter 1, there's a 2% chance of entering the egg room when crossing between the Starwalker Bird Room and the Darkening Room. The egg room is a small path leading to a tree. Inspecting the tree prompts the narration, "He is behind the tree." Inspecting behind the tree prompts narration of there being a man here who offers you something. Accepting the offer gives Chris the egg. After that interaction, inspecting behind the tree prompts the narration, "Well, there is not a man here." Leaving the egg room takes you back to the bake sale, and the egg room cannot be re-entered if it has already been entered. Next, in Chapter 2's egg room, there's a 2% chance of entering the egg room as well when re-entering the dumpster room in the west alley of the road with yellow cars, only after the annoying dog cutscene is played. In the dumpster room, there is graffiti of a tree with narration that reads, "The room between. There is a room between." The egg room itself is identical to the one in Chapter 1, aside from a blue pathway leading to it from the east. The same events play out as Chapter 1's egg room, except for the lines of narration leading up to the egg offer, which read, "Well, there's a man here. He might be happy to see you. What do you think?" Leaving the egg room takes you back to the dumpster room, and the egg room cannot be re-entered if it has already been entered. Chapter 2's egg room is inaccessible on the weird route, however, due to the annoying dog no longer being present. Now, in Chapter 3's egg room is where things begin to change. Instead of RNG, accessing the egg room is a multi-step process. First, go to the path of the bottom left of the room at the start of the TV World entrance area where the TV puzzle is. Second, complete the puzzle using the Lancer controller from earlier in the area, then use Susie to throw the blue block between the plants on the other side of the river. Third, go to the area to the bottom right of the green room, below the Shetta, and purposefully get caught by the spotlight. When the zapper interrogates, select Cheater, then Nowhere. If the blue block was thrown correctly, push it onto the button to solve the puzzle. Walk to the right, talk to the in-game Bibliox continuously, then re-enter the game room once by walking to the right, then back to interact with the closet. The trip ticket will be added to the key items. The ticket's description reads, "A map pointing to the left of a red X." 5. Go to a Ribic and hover over the Crocon X act, and, without selecting the act, hold the left input. The soul will visibly walk to the left. 6. And final step, Chris is then transferred to Man Country. Chris is in their Lightworld outfit in this egg room. Throughout the egg room, there are signs in the 7 Flying Aces, cards Chris photocopied when they were little and colored in to cheat at games of cards. The 7th is missing, but can be found in Chapter 4's egg room. To the north of the egg room is an entrance to a room with a monochrome variant of the tree. This is the first and only instance so far of the Forgotten Man speaking to Chris. To get the egg, you must be very agreeable. The Forgotten Man explains his schedule to Chris. On Thursday, he goes to sell the donuts. On Friday, he tosses the leftovers in the dumpster. On Saturday, he lets it cool on the windowsill. On Sunday, he harvests the wheat. Hold your breath, head to the left, and count backwards to 100. Afterwards, Chris is in their Dark World outfit. The egg room is inaccessible if Ribics were defeated with violence and/or the final mantle game was already completed. Lastly, Chapter 4's egg room. Like Chapter 3, this one is different compared to Chapter 1 and 2's egg rooms, but the process of finding it is neither reliant on RNG or a multi-step process. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, this egg room can be accessed in the second Sanctuary's Moss room, a room of windows, one of which is very subtly changed so that the circle shape at the top is instead an egg. Underneath it is an invisible entrance which takes you to the secret room I talked about before. Walking between these rooms exactly 8 times will take you to the egg room. The egg room is a clinic with the 7th Flying Ace manning the front desk. To the left are 3 doors, in the middle with a tree on it and one at either side occupied. Entering the middle room leads to an invisible, out-of-bounds area with several interactable objects in it. A tree, the Forgotten Man, an NPC, a sink, and a canvas. The NPC's dialogue is interesting, as they say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was filmed a drawing, I didn't notice you. Are you here for art club? Right, this is where we draw pictures, and don't kill each other. What am I drawing? Oh, don't look, I'm not finished yet." Keep in mind the specific phrasing of the third line. Interacting with the canvas and choosing to draw prompts narration detailing Chris drawing what they saw behind the tree. At the end of the narration, Chris will pick up an egg from a nearby easel. I'll read through the narration here. Chris picked up a pencil. They began by sketching what they had seen behind the tree. But, as they sketched, the line began to err as if the pencil had lost its way. So they started again, drawing over the lines they had already made. Many times they would suddenly halt, or the pencil drifted into a new drawing. So they started over again. Through many repetitions, their movements became faster and smoother, until, without looking, they had completed a sketch in a single wild line. In the end, as a result of layering the sketches on top of each other, the surface of the canvas was nothing more than a monochrome smear. Next, a tree was painted over it. Painted over everything, leaving nothing but a simple still life. After all, there wasn't anything to look at in the room besides a single tree. Chris got up. It seemed the painting was complete. But their hand, smudged with graphite, was still moving, as if to trace some unseen shape. An egg was picked up from a nearby easel. Afterwards, the narration for the sink changes and the Forgotten Man is gone. The narration for the sink is, "You ran water over your hands and dried them. Between your fingers, a faint gray crease glittered stubbornly. You could never wash it all away." Interacting with the 7th flying ace after the session will prompt new dialogue. They say, "Well, how did the session go?" They say art is therapeutic. "Which one of you was the patient anyway?" And then talking to them again, they say, "Well, you got paid, didn't you?" Exiting the egg room takes you back to the moss room, and this chapter's egg room is accessible regardless of whether the weird route has occurred or if enemies have been defeated with violence. But if missed, it can be accessed again in the 3rd sanctuary by Ornorganic, who asks Chris if they had missed something on the other side of your mind. Saying no will open a door into the moss room. Now, with all that out of the way, we can ask ourselves the question, what does the Forgotten Man and the egg rooms represent? Up until Chapter 3 and 4, the Forgotten Man and the egg rooms were seemingly just a sort of meta-commentary on secrets and Easter eggs in video games. But after Chapter 3 and 4, they seem to be increasingly pointing toward memories Chris has repressed surrounding a traumatic event, likely the one that involved deaths. This is best highlighted in Chapter 4's egg room, which literally appears as a clinic and the setting being art therapy. And in the secret room before this, there is a prophecy image Roots with the NPC who says the "lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail" line, along with a peculiar book hinting at the night and the shadow crystals. But the way the room itself plays out reads very much like a garbled, repressed memory, one that Chris has pushed so far down that it makes everything become muddied. This is communicated through the 7th flying ace referring to Chris as a therapist when they say, "Chris, the patients are waiting for you," and at the end, "Which one of you was the patient anyway?" We can assume the "which one of you" is specifically referring to Chris and the soul, controlled by you, the player. The narration itself when Chris is drawing is very clearly describing a memory where Chris becomes distressed drawing what they saw behind the tree as well. And the Forgotten Man is a big part of the repressed memories, possibly being who or what Chris saw behind the tree. Again, this is why I don't personally believe the Forgotten Man to be Gaster, whether it's him as in the voice or him as in Deltarune's original Gaster, because Chris clearly saw something or someone behind the tree, and that was the Forgotten Man. Why else would he be forgotten if he weren't a part of this specific trauma, if he weren't what or who Chris saw behind the tree? I've seen people point out that the layout of the clinic is similar to the layout of the hospital, but that instead of there being a middle room in the hospital like there is in the clinic, there's just a sign, and this suggests that Deltarune's Gaster is forgotten in the sense that he was shattered as well. But and maybe this is because it's a garbled memory, but the clinic's layout isn't the exact same as the hospital's. It's similar, yes, but different. The clinic is all one room, while the hospital is multiple. Am I being too nitpicky? Is it obvious that I think the Forgotten Man just being some variant of Gaster at this point is contrived? I don't know. Look, I want Gaster to be important as much as the next guy, but it's just not adding up for me. It feels too complicated. But I digress. Moving on. Psychologically, eggs themselves represent things like potential, fragility, and transformation. Collecting the eggs could both be a meta-commentary and symbolic of Chris cracking their shell to unlock new potential. Chris collecting these eggs could symbolize them cracking the shell they have built around themselves as a result of their trauma. Alright, we've gone over everything relating to the Forgotten Man, or so it seems, but one last thing remains. We still haven't exactly pieced together why Gaster sees the eggs as an issue. Earlier, I touched on how the eggs and the Forgotten Man relate to Friend, and then later I discussed the uncertain nature of Friend and Gaster's connection to each other. Like, we don't know that Gaster created Friend. It makes sense to assume that because he's a scientist. But if he created Friend, why would he make it so that they're seemingly a malicious force in the prophecy? He's clearly very fond of the discarded vessel, so what makes Friend so different? There isn't really anything that solidifies or strongly hints toward Friend being a creation of Gaster, at least in my opinion. So, I propose a theory. Friend wasn't created by Gaster. Friend isn't even allies with Gaster. Friend is the Forgotten Man. Okay, hear me out. I know this is crazy. Actually, is it really even that crazy? I'm honestly a bit surprised I haven't seen anyone else think of it, especially when, to me, the connections are all there. But I guess it makes sense because so many people have latched onto the idea of the Forgotten Man being Gaster in some way. And that's fair. It's just that after thinking about it for a long while, I had an epiphany. One I couldn't stop thinking about. It's the thing that made me make this video after all. So let's go over it. Both are associated with RNG, out of bounds areas and in between states, and Friend is associated with the depths, and the Forgotten Man knows both Deltarune the Prophecy and Deltarune the Executable, something likely only one from the depths could know. Again, it's possible the spelling here doesn't actually distinguish anything. Because the spelling for the prophecy is somewhat inconsistent, it's unclear, so take this with a grain of salt. But Friend makes an appearance strikingly similar to Endogeny, and in Undertale's True Lab, it's possible the Forgotten Man was referenced. After turning on the fans in the lab ventilation room to dispel the fog, you are forced into an encounter with Endogeny. So for more context, in the True Lab's refrigerator room, if it's still all fogged up, interacting with the refrigerators can generate different narration. One of them reads, "There's something here. It feels like a tree, ripe with delicious fruit." And another is, "There's something here, something in the shape of a man." What's interesting about this is, if you want to clear the fog to access this room better, you have to go into the lab ventilation room and turn on the fans. But upon doing this, you are forced into an encounter with Endogeny. Now, most people see the narration as a possible hint at the Forgotten Man, and most people notice that Friend's appearance in Ralsei's Dark World explanation cutscene resembles Endogeny. This could just be a coincidence, but it's the fact that these two rooms in the True Lab, one with a possible reference to the Forgotten Man and the other with Endogeny, who looks like Friend, that sticks out to me. In any case, this doesn't outright prove that Friend is the Forgotten Man, if anything, it just suggests there's a connection, which we've already established. So, Friend's seemingly amorphous appearance suggests that they can shapeshift. Again, in Egg, Noelle says that the special egg was probably because she had so many mods installed that the egg just didn't know what to hatch into, implying an amalgam of potential was contained in the egg. What I mean by amorphous is how Friend's appearance is largely inconsistent, save for their yellow and pink eyes and their wide grin. They are associated with cats many times, but they also have the ability to appear as a disembodied pair of eyes and a mouth, disembodied eyes by themselves, a disembodied mouth by itself, a cat head that can just pop out of the ground, a completely black disembodied pair of eyes and a mouth, and a suspiciously Endogeny-looking entity. The fact that the first quote-unquote defined appearance we get of Friend is them looking like an amalgamate, beings who are indistinct and amorphous, communicates to me that they have the ability to shapeshift. There is more to the specific point that I'll bring up later in relation to something else, but for now, keep it in mind. Lastly, Chapter 3's Egg Room takes place in an area similar in design to the Mantle and Legend of Tana games, the former being the original game where Friend makes several appearances, if not just responsible for giving Chris access to playing it in the first place, and is also notably the only place where the Forgotten Man can talk. Additionally, accessing Chapter 3's Egg Room is also like an adventure, which, considering Chapter 3's Dark World was created by Chris, and Dark Fountains reflect the will of their creator, this could be a reference to their repressed memories, connecting it to the Chapter 4 phrase, "Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail." Okay, this bit fascinates me, and I'm honestly a bit surprised no one else has noticed or talked about it, as far as I've seen. When I say the Chapter 3 Egg Room is similar in design to the Mantle and Legend of Tana games, I mean that it has the same retro video game look to it. While this could just be because Chris's childhood had them playing lots of video games, I think it could still also be some kind of connection, especially when we consider that going out of our way to find it is a lot like going on a hunt, much like how Chris and Des followed the pointed tail. That's why I say this egg room reads like a depiction of Chris's repressed memory surrounding that. Another thing is the fact that the Forgotten Man doesn't seem to mention this chapter's egg room in his schedule. Sure, it could be the hold your breath, head to the left, and count backwards to 100 line, but why would it be at the end and not in between Friday and Saturday, which is when chapter 3 takes place? That bit just stuck out to me, even if it's not anything crucial. Additionally, both are associated with love. To start, allow me to refer to the friend Master Doc. Remember how I explained that Friend's eye colors, yellow and pink, when connected to the Maneki Neko, mean value and love respectively, and this lines up well with Spamton? Well, what are the three main mechanics of cat petters? One is getting as many points as possible through minigames, another is making cats fall in love and make eggs, and the last one is hatching rare cats from those eggs. To put it more bluntly, the first mechanic is value, the second is love, and the final one is RNG. So not only is RNG a consistent marker of friend, but it seems that love and value are too. And the Forgotten Man, his secret Valentine's Day letter, which I should specify is called SSSSSSSR in his file name, referencing its rarity and thereby making it the rarest letter, tying it to RNG as well, is obviously about love. He says that every day is a day of love, and at the start of the letter, it says that if you squint your heart, you can understand it. If that wasn't enough, in Ralsei's Dark World explanation cutscene, Friend appears right when Ralsei talks about feeling things. He says, "What if we could take away the light that wasn't there, until we reached another side? If that were to happen, you could start to see things again, and hear them, and feel them." That is when Friend appears. And finally, Noelle's special egg, left home due to happiness. What's notable is that Noelle would always prevent her cats from falling in love, because she was terrified they'd create an uncompatible pet and crash her game. But then one day, when she was trying to hatch the ultimate cat, that's when she got the special egg. Again, I don't believe this literally happened, but the reason all these things exist and connect with each other is likely because Friend could be drawn to strong emotions. Love, obsession, desperation, determination, fear, paranoia. Wait, what? Oh, sorry, we're not there yet. Anyway, next, the Forgotten Man speaking in the Lightworld style in the Japanese localization could simply reflect Friend mimicking the speaking style of Lightners. You would probably assume that the fact that Forgotten Man speaks in the Lightworld style in the Japanese localization means he's a Lightner, and that's a fair assumption. But the 7 Flying Aces speak in the Lightworld style as well, and they're clearly not Lightners. So how does this connect to Friend? Well, if Friend can indeed shapeshift, perhaps they can mimic the speaking style of others as well. And considering their ties to the meta-narrative and the Forgotten Man's ties to it as well, Friend's speech as the Forgotten Man accommodating for the on-screen dialogue to be hiragana heavy makes sense. They're mimicking the speech of a Lightner. Lastly, Chapter 3's egg room has a weird emphasis on being a man. This in specific is so strange to me. There's a few ways this could be read, of course, but for the sake of this video, the emphasis on it being man country, a man's world, like, if Friend can really shapeshift, then it makes sense that this specific egg room, reflective of Chris especially, has so much emphasis on being a man, because if Friend was what Chris saw behind the tree, then they likely took the form of a man, but perhaps it wasn't very convincing, or there was something uncanny about it. It's almost like this egg room, reflective of Chris's repressed memory, is trying to convince Chris that what's behind the tree is an actual man, someone they can trust, so long as they're agreeable. Of course, this could just be because of Chris's apparent discomfort with humans, which I'll get to. It's just an odd thing to emphasize, and it leads me to think that the Forgotten Man maybe wasn't actually a man after all. Again, I know this theory is probably crazy, but there's still so much to go over that could only add to it. After all, Friend being the Forgotten Man is one thing, but what about all of Friend's other connections? What do they mean? Well, I briefly alluded to it earlier, but it's possible that the Knight and Friend could know each other. First, Des has connections to Friend due to the pointed tail incident. And if we assume it to be Des, the voice in the unused text mentions scratching, growing fond of it over time. Scratching is also a behavior of cats, used to relieve stress or boredom, mark territory, and maintain claws. And the Knight is implied to be the one creating the shadow crystals, but may not necessarily be the one distributing them. Alright, the shadow crystals are still pretty mysterious. It's definitely likely that the Knight is the one creating the shadow crystals, but we also have to consider that before the Titan fight in Chapter 4, when climbing the pillars, some of the eyes cry black tears. Then again, the Knight does look quite a bit like one of the Titans. But that aside, let's assume the Knight is the one creating the shadow crystals. Okay, but are they the one distributing them? As I went over earlier, it seems that from what Sham says in Chapter 1, that the Knight and the strange someone Jevil met are two different people. After all, they say that the Knight appeared only recently, whereas they seem to talk about the incident with Jevil like it was longer ago. In that case, how did Jevil get the shadow crystal? King tells us in Chapter 4 that Jevil was the one who told him of the Knight's brilliance, so that must mean Jevil met the Knight, correct? Well, not necessarily. It's never directly said. King just says Jevil told him about the Knight, not that Jevil met the Knight. It'd be fair to assume that was the case, but how would the knight be able to meet with Jevil and give him a shadow crystal if he was already locked away? And what reason would King have for going down to the castle basement to speak to Jevil, who was likely already locked up before the knight arrived? Next, there's Spamton. Spamton found a shadow crystal placed inside the robot body in the mansion of Queen's basement, but all throughout Chapter 2, there is little indication that the knight has ever directly appeared in Cyberworld. Spamton does have a line about the knight, but nothing in that line reads as though he's met the knight personally either. Then, in Chapter 3, a shadow crystal can be obtained through breaking off a piece of the knight's bat sword. But in Chapter 4, Gerson says that he found a shadow crystal placed in his desk, saying that someone must have really wanted him to use it. So that does make things a bit more ambiguous, especially if we consider how he says he saw the knight fly through his study and then pass the middle door upstairs. But then again, all Gerson says is that he found a shadow crystal in his desk. He doesn't say anything about who put it there, and the only bit we get of him encountering the knight was when he saw the knight fly through his study and only upstairs. So there's still enough room for ambiguity to suggest the knight wasn't the one to give Gerson a shadow crystal. So, let's say the knight isn't the one distributing the shadow crystals. Who would it be? Ding ding ding, that's right, I think it's Friend. Why? Say it with me, we'll get to that! Next, the knight is also capable of shapeshifting, but is implied to not change form in the light world. The same possibly applies to Friend. I left this out when speculating that Friend can shapeshift, but yeah. The knight seems to be able to turn into a weird baseball-looking object, a bird-like entity, a pained-looking disfigured creature where it looks like their ribcage is splitting open and showing a weird eye thing, and also, when they take damage and at the end of their fight, they seem to glitch out like they're made of static or something. If we assume Des to be the knight, as well as the voice in the unused text, she could have wound up in the depths, the place which Jevil says Hell's roar bubbles from, if you defeat him with violence. And this is why she appears like that. Besides, when the Titan spawn take damage, they similarly glitch out like the knight. Additionally, the weapon the knight drops when you defeat it, the Black Shard, is the only weapon in the game that doesn't change between the light and dark worlds. Because it breaks off of the knight's bat sword as well, this leads me to think that the knight doesn't change forms in the light world. Susie assumes they're a lightner, and although she couldn't see much, if it were someone we've already seen in Hometown, she likely would have recognized them later during the day. Again, if we take the pointed tail as a literal thing both Chris and Des saw, and Friend originates from the depths, this suggests Friend doesn't change forms either. Next, the knight and Friend both use the same sound when laughing, just named differently in the files. The knight's laugh sound effect is SND_knight_laugh. Friend's laugh sound effect uses different names, called face.ogg in Sweepstakes and SND_face_hit in Mantle. Here's what they sound like. So this is the knight's. And here's Friend's laugh. Also, when I was thinking over this point, I remembered something interesting. In Spamton's shop in Chapter 2, when you pick the About You dialogue, he tells Chris that if they like his transformation, they too can have a communion with unintelligible laughter. Then, when you pick the Knight dialogue, he says, "Speaking of communion, Chris, did you know that the Knight..." before abruptly cutting himself off. What we know now is that the Knight has a garbled laugh, but again, it's not that likely that Spamton ever met the Knight personally. Given all his connections to Friend and the fact Friend's laugh is the same as the Knight's, Spamton's lines here seem to indicate that he was going to allude to some kind of connection between the knight and the figure who brought him his luck. But in hindsight, it seems like Chris was the one to threaten him to keep quiet, given that they're implied to be working with the knight and they probably don't want you overhearing. There's a question of how much Chris just knows about the knight, and I'll go into that in a bit, but my point was I feel like Spamton's lines here allude to Friend and the knight being connected. Lastly, roaring is a behavior of big cats. This isn't really that earth-shattering of a point, I just wanted to mention it. I don't think it's necessarily intentional, it's just a cool coincidence if all of this is correct. So all of this definitely lends us the possibility of there being a connection between Friend and the knight. But why would there be a connection? What even does this connection truly entail, if it's real? Well, let's talk about Des. Not Des the knight, but Des. Again, assuming it's Des, the voice at Chapter 3's unused text references having a nightmare. What is this place, anyway? How did I get here? As if I haven't asked that question a billion times already. I always did have that nightmare. Walking into the darkness, with the light shining from the doorway, and the door slams behind me and everything goes black. Is this that nightmare? Or was everything else a dream? Not only that, but Des's bed is in a weird position, facing away from her closet, and she has army rations and multi-tool knives stored in her room. With the army rations and multi-tool knives, it's possible that they could just be signifying how Des used to go exploring. She has tons of stuff in her room, clearly indicating that she was figuring herself out and learning everything she could in order to do so. We know that she, Chris, Noelle, and Azriel all went exploring as kids, so some of the stuff in Dessa's room could very well be reflective of that. But what sticks out to me is the weird position of her bedroom. I know we all joke about tricky Tony not knowing perspective and making art mistakes, but I think, considering the unused text, this isn't just a coincidence. Additionally, this suggests that despite her fearless exterior, Des could have been a very paranoid person, possibly even a doomsday prepper given the intensity of Hometown's religion. What I mean by that is Hometown's religion is intense in that, at least in present canon, there seems to be very little interaction with art and media from outside of it. There's a thing with the internet being down, which only started recently, but like Dragon Blazers, Cat Pedders, Lord of the Hammer, all these works of fiction are just reiterations of the prophecy of Hometown's religion. The people of Hometown are constantly exposed to what is basically one kind of story, having it shoved down their throats. Considering Dessa's likely rebellious, experimental nature, she probably didn't feel very fondly of Hometown's religion, and this was further exemplified by her nightmare. Underneath that tough big sister exterior was someone likely very scared. Maybe that's why she acted out so much, to try and avoid what she feared her nightmare was foretelling. Besides, the Knight looks like one of the Titans, which embody fear of the dark. And considering Friend's appearance in the Chapter 3 Dark World explanation cutscene as something the imagination creates to fill in what it can't understand, which is the absence of light, perhaps Dessa's desperate, paranoid imagination in the depths was what summoned the scratching, which was from Friend. In that case, Dessa's fear could have consumed her, leading to her becoming the Knight, and Friend is exploiting that fear. Now, there's obviously someone else working with the Knight, someone else who has connections to Friend. That's right, I'm talking about Chris. Chris is implied to struggle or have struggled with intrusive thoughts, urges, and violent or cruel tendencies, and Iram uses this to antagonize Chris, and notably, Friend appears in Iram's fight. Before the fight with Iram, they say, "Do you honestly think it'll get you what you want?" "No, part of you is just enjoying this, isn't it?" Adding in the weird route, "The same part of you that enjoyed yesterday, knowing you could say it wasn't really you." And then normally, they say, "Oh, don't make that sour face." And at the end of their fight, they say, "There, that's what I wanted to see. Flickering red like pretty little flames. Your eyes can't hide it, Chris. Without play, the knife grows dull."
Semi-unrelated tangent incoming.
Sword Route says a lot more about Chris's character rather than you, the player, in my opinion. I think we all have this tendency to defend Chris at any cost, to the point where anytime they even show the slightest hint of real quote-unquote moral complexity, we want to say that it's not them, it's the player. But isn't that just kind of circling back around to robbing Chris of being their own person? Because that's right, they aren't you. They are their own person with their own qualities, their own flaws, their own joys, their own traumas. They quite literally contain multitudes. The Sword Route is a look into Chris as a character. It, along with the other things we learn about Chris, tells us that they struggled and likely even still struggle with intrusive thoughts and urges, as well as violent or otherwise cruel tendencies, and that the games they used to play in their childhood, back before Death disappeared, were an arguably healthier way of expressing those thoughts, urges, and tendencies, as they were in the safe, controlled environment of fiction. That's why Bram wants Chris to play Mantle so badly, because he sees it like the games Chris used to play, one that gives freedom. But is it really freedom? It doesn't have real-life consequences, it's just a game, nobody's getting hurt. But compared to the other options Chris has, like The Legend of Tenna, where sure, it's still considerably linear, but it's still got plenty of other options, exploration, multiplayer, immersion with the characters, minigames like rhythm games and cooking games, how is Mantle any more freeing? If anything, it's less freeing. All it is finding a sword, killing every single enemy in the area, reaching max level, and obtaining a secret item to progress. But for Chris, it's freeing in the sense that it allows them to express their struggles more healthily. There's no real moral consequences for it. It's just a video game. But then it starts to hit a little too close to home. The control they thought they had, even here, begins to get called into question. There's nothing here, is there? Nothing but the key to that place. In the end, they were still used up. All they are is a means to an end, even here. But that's not so bad. At least there's something. Something that can still be useful, something that can still do right by others. So what if they have to kill the lookalikes of their friends in order to get stronger? It's not really their friends, it's just a game. It's safe. Maybe a bit morbid, but it's fiction. After all, without play, the knife grows dull, doesn't it? Okay, tangent over. But also, I don't know what Iram is. I'm inclined to think they're the devil horn headband Chris wore. Maybe they lost it because when Des went missing, it got left behind in the shelter, and that's why in the second Legend of Tenna game, there's the red antlion under the ground, fangs of youth unearthed with a photo, and the door to Iram's secret hiding place has a devil horn headband as a doorframe. I'm not going to speculate on it much. I think they're just Chris's evil shadow self, basically. This makes Merle say Chris's good shadow self. What does that mean? It's complicated. Anyway, Chris seems to be at least uncomfortable, if not hateful or scared of other humans, and uncomfortable with being a human themselves. We see this in how, for example, Toriel recounts in Chapter 1 how when Chris was little, they'd ask when their horns were going to grow in like the rest of the Dreamers, so they were gifted the devil horn headband. Another example in Chapter 2 is near the end when opening the inside of the How to Care for a Human book in the library, and Chris shuts the book quickly upon seeing unfamiliar humans. And in Chapter 4 as well, when Susie sees a picture on the fridge in Chris's house with Chris wearing the devil horn headband. She starts to ask about them and tease Chris, but then trails off, seeming to understand without it needing to be said. It's also easy to infer Chris's insecurity about being human from the fact they're the only human in hometown. The Titan's silhouette, before it's fully revealed, also looks a lot like the silhouette of a human head. And Chris is considerably squeamish and fearful, despite being someone who enjoyed scaring others, especially Noelle, in the past. For example, in Chapter 4, in the Jackenstein fight, Chris gains their own unique act, Scaredy Cat, if you have a save file that has previously encountered Jackenstein. This act's flavor text includes, "Your heart pump nervously," and selecting it increases the soul's movement speed while also lowering the party's defense. I personally believe that things like Chris's unique acts, their dialogue prompts, and bits of the narration at times reflect bits of their character, so to me, this reads as Chris showing fear. Additionally, in Chapter 1, the Heart's Donut healing item has varied healing and heals Chris the least, restoring only 20 HP to them. This is likely because the Heart's Donut is described as being filled with divisive, cloddy red jam, and when giving it to Susie, she says, blood. And when giving it to Noelle, she says, what? It's blood? All things considered, Chris is likely healed the least from it because it reminds him of blood, and Noelle's flavor text reads as Chris telling her it's blood. While that could just be a prank from Chris, again, considering how little it heals them, I think Chris isn't necessarily trying to prank Noelle here and more so just showing disgust. Next, Chris could blame their humanity for their flaws as a person, associating violent or cruel tendencies and quote-unquote evilness with humans. This is a trait they share with Kara. Do not debate with me on whether Chris is Deltarune's Kara or Frisk. They're both. Go read The Only Human doc by Shifters Inc. You will understand. Finally, Friend taking the form of a human man as the Forgotten Man could represent them embodying Chris's fear, combined with the trauma that stemmed from that interaction Chris had with the Forgotten Man. If you can't tell, Chris is my favorite character in Deltarune. They're far more complex than people give them credit for, and I can't exactly fit everything I want to say about them in just this one video. It'd go way too off track and be much longer. But I think Friend appearing to them as the Forgotten Man when they were little symbolizes the struggles Chris was experiencing back then. From what we know about Chris in their early years, they definitely seem to be a lot more impulsive, which is what led to a lot of their dark pranks and erratic behavior. I'm no professional, so my intention is not to explicitly diagnose Chris with anything here. But Chris has clearly shown signs of mental stability on several occasions, so I think it's possible them seeing Friend as the man behind the tree could represent a sort of hallucination, and when combining that with the possibility Des was also a teenager struggling with paranoia, them following the pointed tail together could be a representation of their shared struggle kicking off the events of the story. That's not to say I don't think Friend is an actual tangible entity. I do. I've gone over that. At the same time, though, I think Friend can also be a metaphorical manifestation of things like imagination and strong emotions. They don't necessarily have to be just a logical, ordinarily existing entity. Rather, their presence points to the underlying element across all of Deltarune's main themes as a story. Or, to put it more plainly, Friend is a symbol for fear. What do I mean by this? Well, for starters, Friend being most consistently depicted as a creepy smile briefly seen in dark areas could be a reference to seeing something in the corner of your eye, something that isn't there, or mistaking a harmless object for a person. Additionally, in Ralsei's Dark World explanation, he notes just before Friend appears that, you see, when it gets dark, things become more indistinct. A chair can look like a monster. A poster can look like it's moving. Your eyes can't see the truth anymore. As the Friend Master Doc says, indistinct means not clearly shaped or defined, and that lines up well with Friend, living uncertainty, the embodiment of imagination and strong emotion combined. They're an in-between state, just like the egg rooms, not exactly one thing, but not exactly another either. That's why they appear in this cutscene resembling Androgyny, who's known for being made of an uncertain number of dogs at once. Fear is also an oddly subtle theme in Deltarune, as it permeates through a lot of the other themes, such as determinism, fate, freedom, identity, expectations, and belonging, secrets, mysteries, and Easter eggs. I also saw someone point out how the secret bosses all take on the appearance of more cliché fears. Jevil is a creepy clown, Spamton is a creepy puppet, Gersten is more or less a ghost, the knight is like an otherworldly being, the mics are 3 people pretending to be one person nobody's even sure actually exists, representing the fear of the unknown. And if you count Irem, they're basically the embodiment of Chris's damaged, impulsive, struggling, childlike self. The notion of freedom is associated with fear. Isn't it interesting, then, that Friend seems to have connections to all of these secret bosses in one way or another? Darkness is also a big thing in Deltarune, and there exists the fear of the dark, which is what Titans embody. I see people also questioning why water is such a big thing in Deltarune, why the ocean and rain and floods are a recurring theme. Molly Stars touched on this in her device theory, but the ocean and water as a metaphor for fiction, imagination, and fear all make sense. The ocean is unknown, it's otherworldly, we haven't explored all of it, we aren't made to survive it, and the deeper you go, the darker it gets. The more indistinct things become, and the more alien the life forms appear. It's so dark that it basically primes your imagination to take the driver's seat. That's why there's so many myths regarding the ocean and what lies at the bottom. Myths are fiction, they're stories. It makes sense why Toby uses water and ocean imagery to coincide with the darkness as a metaphor for fiction. And Friend could symbolize fear both narratively and meta-narratively. Within the narrative, they symbolize psychological fear, but within the meta-narrative, they symbolize existential fear. This could explain why they have connections to Noelle as well, who is a very fearful person with a knack for breaking games. Considering Friend's file name follows the exact same naming convention as assets used in the depths, not only does this further suggest it's the place Friend originates from, but it emphasizes the meta aspects of Friend. Molly Star's device theory proposed that the assets used in the depths were created by Gaster, as were things like the save menus, the UI, the battle system, and so on, and I think that's still quite plausible. Gaster wants to build a connection with you, after all. But isn't it possible that these assets, which are found in the code and named differently because they're found in the depths in-game, represent the very fabric of Deltarune's reality? Because Deltarune is so clearly about fiction, with darkness and water being metaphors for it, Deltarune itself is also fictional, obviously. It's a game, and games are made using code. So in Deltarune the game, the depths presents itself not only narratively as the darkest one can possibly go, but also meta-narratively, as the very thing which constructs its reality. This suggests then that Friend has a level of meta-awareness, which would make sense due to them appearing out of bounds and in darker worlds such as Mantle, which is a game within a game. It's just fascinating to me. Do I think Friend is actually aware they exist in a video game? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. I think either possibility is interesting, but yeah. Lastly, Friend seems tied to strong emotions and imagination in general. Love, obsession, desperation, determination, fear, paranoia, and freedom. I mean, think about it. What is required to make a dark fountain? The power of the will, the power of determination. We don't exactly know the properties of determination in Deltarune, but if we look at it as simply emotion, it becomes the firmness of purpose, resolve. And then, when a dark fountain is created, that dark world reflects the will of its creator. It reflects their feelings, their imagination, how those two converge and interact with each other. That's why Susie's recreation of a dark world in Chapter 4 is so different and doesn't go well. The first half of the dark world that the knight made had a clear intent and purpose, with a sentiment to it, leading to Gersten's presence. Given the likelihood of Des being the knight, Gersten was her teacher, and knowing how good of a teacher he was to Susie, we can assume that Des probably also held a lot of respect for him, while also knowing him better and for longer. Susie didn't know him as well, nor was it for very long, so the image she had of him in her mind wasn't as defined as the knight's. And this is just on determination. I've gone over how Friend is tied to love, freedom, fear, and paranoia, but we also see obsession and desperation in Spamton. Chris too, if we consider their own desire for freedom. But on that front, what's the point of the eggs? Well, I've talked about what eggs themselves symbolize: transformation, potential, and rebirth. But why does Friend leave the eggs in the egg rooms lying around? What is their intention? Well, Friend could be getting Chris to collect the eggs so that they can remember what happened, crack their shell, and break free, but it could also be a trap or lead to something bad, as considering Friend gave both Jevil and Spamton a taste of freedom and it made them go insane, it's possible that the freedom Chris could be granted from collecting all the eggs is a similar kind of freedom. It could also be a meta-commentary on going out of your way to find secrets and let your curiosity get the better of you, as these secrets relate to Chris's trauma, and if it's to help them remember, then the fact that the eggs are optional suggests that Chris doesn't need the eggs to figure themselves out. As the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. And going even more meta, it could draw attention to the player-protagonist separation, as you are forcing Chris to relive these memories when they don't need to. This could again signal a possible level of meta-awareness from Friend. I'm sure that Toby wouldn't just leave Chris's past and trauma confined strictly to optional secrets either. Even though the eggs are likely indicative of something down the line, I don't think the contents we uncover while collecting them will be kept entirely secret. At some point, Chris will learn to figure themselves out in the main story. Their past will be revealed in its own way, and their trauma too. But this egg hunt we're doing, it's not required. Not too important, not too unimportant. It's uncertain what's to come of it. So who's to say we aren't just following the pointed tail all over again? Alright, now I've gone over all of the main connections. I've discussed my theory and further speculation of what Friend represents in the story. Clearly that means we can end the video here. Wait, there's more? That's right, if it wasn't already insane enough, Friend has connections to the Titans, Serpents, and Hell. What do I mean by this? Well, for the Titans, both possibly embody fear, and both appear in the dark and in out-of-bounds areas. Given both appearing in out-of-bounds areas, this suggests both come from the depths as well, and both have connections to egg/hatching. And with Serpents, in the Princess Ribbon puzzle room, falling from the middle tile of the Climbing Wall's third section, between the Ring of Heaven and Tail of Hell prophecies, this leads to a secret room where an NPC talks about a slithering serpent formed from growing shadow. They say,
Before the clock strikes midnight, the shadow will grow. Oh, the shadow will grow, serpentine. Even when the clock ran back, the shadow was growing. A patch of shadow, slithering on, serpentine. So saith our ancestors. Crazy fellows the lot.
To be fair, this Hidden Room prophecy image is literally just a Jockington grows a beard image. But it's weird. Especially if you consider that the phrase growing the beard is a trope which refers to the quality of a story noticeably improving in quality. Jockington is also a snake. Why is this between the Ring of Heaven and Tail of Hell prophecies anyway? Is this Toby's way of telling us that when Jockington grows the beard, this means the story is going to go absolutely off the rails? Maybe it's a joke, especially considering the first room this prophecy appears in is also a joke. But it's just odd to me that it reappears here of all places. Not to mention, it's hidden. Like, not to be that guy who thinks everything Toby does is to somehow shock or trick us, I really don't like doing that. But this is weird. Anyway, the flavor text when battling the Titan also references a snake. The darkness gives a long gaze, which slithered like a snake. This also doesn't reference snakes outright, but the line, for a moment you felt your heart being gripped, reminds me specifically of species of snakes that are known to constrict their prey. And also, snakes and serpents hatch from eggs for the most part, and the eggs are very connected to Friend. The pointed tail could also reference the pointed tail of a snake. And lastly, Friend's connections to Hell and the Devil. The pointed tail could also reference the Devil's tail. And in Christianity, the common name for the devil is Lucifer, which means Lightbringer or Morning Star, and the devil is considered to have been a fallen angel. Lightbringer connects to Chris, and fallen angel connects to the fallen star implied to be the night/death. King also outright calls Chris Lightbringer if they try talking to him in his fight in Chapter 1, and considering the soul can emit a brilliant light, that does indeed make Chris and the soul literal Lightbringers. Also, for Des, I've said the name Fallen Star connects to her being a musical prodigy who disappeared, as well as the knight's attacks and element, but it could have a third meaning, especially when Lucifer means morning star. Next, the devil took the form of a snake to tempt Eve into biting the apple from the tree and unleashing knowledge of good and evil unto the world. Apple imagery is also very much a part of Chris's character. I connect this point to Chris and Friend because of Chris's memory of seeing something behind the tree. I don't know if Friend literally tempted them or something, but the tree, Friend's already possible serpent connections, and Chris's apple motif is what makes this stick out to me. Lastly, the Tail of Hell and its unused image cannot make this connection any more obvious. On this last bit though, something I think worth noting is, although the concept of hell has been around for millennia, one of the most famous representations of it is in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. It's an interpretation of the afterlife, notably of hell, purgatory, and heaven. I just think it's interesting that Deltarune, being a story about stories, has references to heaven and hell, which have had their own fair share of interpretations and stories told about them throughout time. I don't know if this means anything, but it's cool regardless. Okay, now one last thing. Will Friend be in Chapter 5? Well, I bring this up because in the Hammer of Justice fight, Gerson calls Chapter 5 of Lord of the Hammer the Field of Pink and Gold. And alongside an optional hidden prophecy image involving Asgore, this seems to be building up toward a dark world relating to Asgore. I've seen people say that this prophecy image, combined with Asgore acknowledging a black shard, means that he's going to be a secret boss. I just want to clear it up that that's likely not the case. See, the prophecy images used for Chapter 2 and 3's main antagonists and final bosses, Queen and Tenna, are called SPR_DW_church_prophecy_boss1 and SPR_DW_church_prophecy_boss2 in the files respectively. The prophecy image used for Asgore is called SPR_DW_church_prophecy_boss3. This means that, in all likelihood, Asgore will be Chapter 5's main antagonist and possibly final boss. I say possibly because I think, given Deltarune is a parallel story to Undertale, and Friend seems to be receiving a lot of build-up, Asgore may not actually be the last enemy we faced in Chapter 5. I mean, Tenna wasn't. So, yeah. Also, the Black Shard Asgore acknowledges, we don't know if that means he just saw a Black Shard or has one in his possession. If it were a Shadow Crystal, I don't see why he wouldn't just call it a piece of glass, because that's what it is in the Light World. It's still unclear, but I don't think Asgore will be the secret boss of Chapter 5, personally. Additionally, pink and gold are also notably Friend's colors, suggesting a potential role they will play in the chapter beyond just hidden appearances. Going back to Asgore though, he also has similarities to Spamton, which could draw Friend's attention, as he's formerly someone with a very successful career, and said career fell apart along with his relationships and reputation, and he became obsessed with the idea of fixing exactly what went wrong, and now he struggles with poverty and living a stable life. It's possible that all these similarities in Asgore drawing Friend's connection could mean he will get a Shadow Crystal. Again, it's unclear. We'll have to just wait and see. It's possible that all these similarities in Asgore likely drawing Friend's attention could mean he will get a Shadow Crystal, but again, it's really unclear and probably not that likely. We'll have to just wait and see. Finally, Chapter 5 may also have a potential jealousy theme. For example, Asgore could be jealous of Sans with Toriel, Noelle could be jealous of Chris and Susie's close friendship, Chris could be jealous of Susie and Noelle's budding romance, Ralsei could be jealous of Susie's healing abilities and/or Noelle's role in the party if she rejoins the Dark World, and Noelle could be jealous of Ralsei's close friendship with Susie and Chris if she rejoins the Dark World. So, what will Friend have to do with this chapter? I don't know, but I can hazard a guess and write a short fanfiction about it. It's possible that Friend will have an overarching presence or influence on the events of this chapter's story, especially regarding Asgore. I alluded to it before, but with Deltarune being Undertale's parallel story, we all saw what happened with Asgore in Undertale's neutral ending. Flowey killed him, and then we had to fight Flowey. For the record, I don't think Deltarune will follow the exact same course of events. I highly doubt Asgore will die here, or that Friend will kill him. Friend doesn't exactly strike me as the killer type, especially if we consider they're drawn to imagination and strong emotions. Things they can't get if someone is dead, obviously. I think instead, the Fun Gang might be able to break Asgore out of his obsession and bring him back to reality. But Friend won't like this, as it means Asgore won't be a source of imagination and strong emotions for them anymore. They'll still have the Knight, of course, but perhaps the Knight is becoming less and less of a reliable source for them. So maybe Friend will do something to Asgore, whether that's trapping him or actually giving him a Shadow Crystal or something else, I don't know. But it'll lead to the Fun Gang facing off Friend. Actually, will it even be the Fun Gang? Ralsei hasn't gotten his own dedicated fight yet. Maybe this will be it. Considering Chris's connections to Friend, they might not want to face him off, being paralyzed with fear and breaking down. And we all know Ralsei believes the Titans exist only to destroy, and with Friend's connections to the Titans via the depths, perhaps with Ralsei knowing fire magic, he might actually use it here. So Ralsei, being Chris's shadow, will fight for them. Susie might also join the fight, but I'm not sure. Possibly Noelle too if she rejoins the Dark World. The three of them will have to come together and ward off Friend. I think Friend might be unbeatable here though. Like, legitimately unbeatable, unless maybe you have the Twisted Sword, but that's another topic entirely. Maybe there's a way to get the Shadow Crystal, but it won't defeat Friend. I'm not sure. Or maybe Friend isn't in possession of a Shadow Crystal at all. Maybe the secret boss is someone else, and this isn't even getting into Noelle learning the truth about the Dark Worlds and the Roaring Night. I really think Friend might be the game's ultimate antagonist though. I know there's a Knight, but for as ominous as they may feel, I don't think they're entirely against the Fun Gang. At least, not Chris, and arguably Ralsei. The Knight seems to be following a set trajectory. Like, why did they take so long to arrive in Chapter 3? Why were they basically just stalling for the majority of Chapter 4 only to create a Titan? Given the likelihood this is the Knight and Friend is exploiting her fear, maybe Friend is the reason the Knight's actions are so deliberate. Or maybe Des, being the Knight, has resigned herself to her fear and her role in the prophecy. Or her Knight form is wearing her down, making her only capable of taking certain actions, which is why she's becoming less and less of a reliable source of imagination and emotions for Friend. But the Knight already seems plenty strong, so that's unclear. And what's Gaster doing? Bro, Gaster is beefing with Friend. They hate each other. Gaster connected with you to defeat Friend and create a new future, because he's sick and tired of the old future he saw, where these troubled and traumatized teens lose themselves to their fear and paranoia. Friend and Gaster aren't allies, they're enemies. Gaster is throwing you in the ring as a soul and rooting for you every step of the way. Chapter 5 might end with Gaster lending you the vessel. I don't know, it'd be cool.
Oh, but Gaster has devil motifs.
Yeah, because Gaster and Undertale discovered the depths, which is Friend's domain, and Friend has devil motifs too, and discovering the depths literally shattered Gaster across time and space such that his existence became the fabric of Deltarune's reality. It warped him and gave him devil motifs because the depths is hell. Does this mean Friend shattered him? Am I really assuming they're that powerful? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, Gaster wants to create a new future. Deltarune, the game, is his fix-it fic. He wants you to find the pieces of Des and put her back together, to save these kids from letting despair and hopelessness overtake them. He wants to defeat Friend. But Friend is the embodiment of imagination and strong emotions, things that are natural and shouldn't be suppressed. Is it really such a good ending? Is the prophecy's ending truly the only way the worlds can be saved? Well, there's something more important than reaching the end, isn't there?
In conclusion,
Friend is a multi-dimensional entity who both embodies and feeds on imagination and strong emotions, such as fear, determination, love, obsession, paranoia, desperation, and more. They originate from the depths, allowing them to possess an amorphous form capable of shapeshifting, yet they do not change into a permanently different thing like an object in the light world. They are responsible for the night, Des' current form, as she has become trapped in her paranoia and fear, and Friend is using that as a source of possibly power and or energy. However, it's possible that the night's state is weakening, causing her to become an unreliable source, which is why Friend has been distributing shadow crystals and driving people insane, so that they can serve as new sources of power and or energy. The eggs could also be an equivalent to this, as they could grant Chris freedom, but it'd be a trap, or only lead to something bad. Regardless, Friend serves as the story's ultimate antagonist, and is the reason Gaster wants to create a new future, in the hopes that by defeating Friend through suppressing imagination and strong emotions, the worlds can be saved. It's why he called upon you to take the role of the soul. But that ending the prophecy foretells isn't exactly what the fun game wants. So, is there another ending? One that will truly bring freedom? Only time will tell. Or none of this is right at all and means nothing. That'll be embarrassing. In any case, thank you for watching. I know that this was a wild ride, a long one at that, so I'm sorry if it's been all over the place and not very well organized. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not one to make theories, especially in video format. Actually, I originally posted an early version of this on my Tumblr, so if people happen to recognize it at all, that was me. I recognize that the majority of this is speculation and could very well be dead wrong. As I said, that'll be embarrassing for me if true, because I'm really passionate about this idea. But that's what AUs are for, right? Besides, whatever Toby cooks up, I'm sure it'll be amazing. I just had fun compiling all of this and writing it into something semi-coherent. Also, there are some things I haven't really touched on, like Carol's involvement in all of this. I just couldn't really find a good place to put it, but my take on Carol is that she's also coercing Chris into following her plans, and that plan seems to involve the soul in finding Des. Chris is also working for the Night, and I don't know if Carol and the Night are necessarily working together. This is maybe something I could go into more in a Chris analysis/theory if anyone is interested in that. It would be funny though if Carol knows about Friend, like she's essentially conspiring with the devil at this point. But in all seriousness, I think Chris is being coerced by Carol and also semi-working with the Night, but Carol and the Night aren't really involved in any way. Carol is a corkboard in her room after all. Why would she have that if she knew about the Night? Maybe she doesn't know the Night is Des, but like, girl, the Night has antlers. I can forgive Susie not knowing because she's Susie, but Carol? Whatever, I don't know. Alright, well, that's a wrap. Again, thanks a lot for watching. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I'm sure there will be things I missed or overlooked, so like I said in the beginning, constructive criticism is welcome. I'm aware this probably all sounds crazy and like a fanfiction, but I'm just having fun and playing. You can't blame me. Deltarune supports telling stories. And again, credits will be in the description. A huge shout out to Wandy Doodles for compiling so much of this stuff. I'll also link his Twitter too, so you can follow him if you want. But shout out to everyone and everything else who's provided insight that I used in this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble as much as I enjoyed rambling. Take care, and bye bye! Also, Jockington grows the beard in Chapter 5.